Ashes filled the room, creating a symphony of sounds as she expertly moved around the kitchen. She was fully engrossed in her work when the doorbell rang, jolting her out of her cooking trance. She wiped her hands with the dish towel and made her way to the main door. As she opened the door, a look of disgust washed over her face, taking in the scene before her. Asher, she whispered with disbelief as Asher was holding a girl and sucking her neck while his hands traced all over her body. Asher, the girl said, patting his shoulder and gestured towards Wine, who looked away with an unpleasant look. Get out of our way, he said, annoyingly pulling the girl closer. Asher, I don't care what you do out there with any girl, but I won't allow you to bring any of your chick to my house. She muttered through gritted teeth. Asher pushed her out of the way and stepped in. Stephanie, go to my bedroom. I'll just deal with her. He gestured to their bedroom and kissed her passionately. Wine felt nauseous. And yeah, I want to see you in my favorite lingerie, he said with a wink while Stephanie chuckled, taking the plastic bag from his hand and walked away. Asher turned towards Wine, who was glaring at him. Out of my house, Asher, she said sternly. Asher raised his brows and out of the blue he grabbed Wine's hair harshly. How did you get the audacity to talk back to me? Looks like you have forgotten your place, he said and slapped her harshly. Wine hissed while Asher began slapping her constantly one after another. Wine fell on the floor. She touched her lips, which were bleeding now. She let out a sigh and stood stumbling. I have enough of you. As Asher was about to hit her again, Wine held his hand in air and struck her knee to his abdomen. Asher groaned, holding his stomach. Out of my house now, she yelled at him. Asher laughed like a maniac. Your house, really? This is my house now. Grandma had bought this house for me. You have nothing to do with it. Take your slut and get out of my house. She choked him, taking him off guard. Wine was surprised by herself. How did she get the courage to fight him back? You signed those papers and transferred this house on my name. Wine's grasp loosened while Asher pushed her with a jerk. Wine stared at him in disbelief. How many times do you have to betray me? She whispered while tears began flowing down her cheeks. Asher chuckled. I would have kicked you out, but you're my ATM. I can't do that. I'll file a divorce tomorrow along with a domestic violence case against you. She wiped her tears, looking around for something. Her eyes landed on a flower vase. She picked it up and broke it. I think I don't want you anymore, he said, thinking something, and looked at Wine, who came towards him with the sharp piece of the vase. Get out of my house. I can't bear your presence anymore. I should have done this earlier. She muttered and raised the sharp piece of the glass on Asher's neck. The blood dripped in a line from his neck. Wine, are you out of your mind? He said with horrified expression. I swear today I won't hesitate to kill you, Asher. I wouldn't care if I went to jail because I have nothing to lose. Her eyes tell him she wasn't just threatening. Today she was a whole different wife, not innocent, scared girl whom Asher had known. Okay, keep it away, I'm going. He raised his hands and spoke softly. Wine moved away while Asher strided towards the main door. Wine walked to the bedroom where Stephanie was putting on Wine's red lipstick. Wine rushed towards her and grabbed her hair harshly. Stephanie groaned in pain. Get out of my house. She pushed her out of the room, picking up her clothes which were lying on the floor and threw them on her face. Stephanie picked them up and walked out of the main door where Asher was waiting for her. Wine locked the main door, pressing her back against it and slid down, allowing her tears to flow freely. She hugged her knees and hid her face in them. I need you, Grandma. Why my loved ones are snatched from me? Why is happiness always out of my reach? Her sobs echoed through the whole house, but no one was there to comfort her. Next day, Asher spent the night at Stephanie's apartment while Stephanie was fuming in rage. Asher somehow coaxed her and decided to teach Wine a lesson. When he woke up in the morning, he received a call from the person he borrowed money from, as he still owes them. Now he came back to Wine's house and rang the bell. Wine opened the door as if she was waiting for him. Sign these papers, she said coldly as soon as she saw him. Relax, wifey, at least let me in. After all, this is my house, he said with a disgusting smell. Wine clenched her jaw and moved out of the way. Asher walked to the sofa and sat. I have signed them. She threw the divorce papers on his face while the sound of heavy footsteps grabbed her attention. Wine turned towards the main door and frowned, seeing 15 to 20 armed men surrounded by them. "Excuse me, who are you all? Thank you for making my job easier. We are officially divorced." He stared at the divorce papers with a smile as he signed them. "You may take her." He gestured to one of the men who had a stern look on his face. While his attire was different from others, he seemed to be the leader. May's eyes widened. "What do you mean? Why would they take me?" Asha stood before her and let out a sigh. "I borrowed money from their boss a few months ago, but I couldn't lend it back. So this morning I talked to their boss and finalized the deal on you being his slave." He completed, shrugging his shoulder. "How could you scoop this low? You sold me." She said with teary eyes and stepped forward. Asher opened his mouth to speak, but May's harsh slap shut his mouth. "I'm not going anywhere," she said and was about to walk out, but Asher held her hand. "Take her to your boss, Henry, and remember she can't be controlled gently," he said through clenched jaw and pushed one before Henry, who just nodded and grasped her arm. "Leave me, Buster, I will not go with you," she yelled, trying to release her hand, but Henry injected a syringe into her neck. Her vision was blurred, while she could see white dots, and soon everything blacked out. Landscape. One blinked her eyes at the voices that seemed distant yet distinct, like whispers carried by the wind. She held her head, feeling its weight and throbbing pain. The heaviness made her movements sluggish as she tried to make sense of her surroundings. The incident of the past few hours flashed before her eyes, making her heartbeat rise and her eyes go wide. She sat straight, looking around the unfamiliar room where Henry was arguing with some other guy. Wayne stood and made her way to the main door, which was wide open. "Where are you going?" He grabbed Wayne's arm, making her hiss as she had bruises given by Asher. "Please let me go," she cried, trying hard to release her arm. "Shut up, boss will be here in a few minutes. He will decide what to do with you," he growled, while Wayne was vigorously shaking her head in denial. She sank her teeth in his hand. Henry groaned in pain and released her hand. Wayne rushed to the main door, but Henry was fast enough to hold her. He turned her towards him and slapped her twice, making her fall on the floor. "Your husband was right. You can't be controlled gently." He glared at Wayne, who was holding her cheek, looking down. Henry's gaze traveled from Wayne to the figure in black shoes behind her. As Henry looked at him, he felt shiver running down his spine. "Boss," he mumbled and lowered his head. "Is this how you treat a woman?" He roared, making everyone flinch. "I told you to ask her whereabouts and safely send her back." Wayne's heart skipped a beat, hearing his deep voice after 2 years. "Him," she whispered inaudibly. The sound of his voice brought a rush of emotions flooding back. The memories of his affectionate gestures remind her of a time when she felt truly cherished and loved. The lingering feelings for him made her both vulnerable and hopeful at the same time, and his painful groan snapped her back to prison. She looked up where Thane was punching Henry constantly and shouting something at him that was deaf to her ears. This wasn't the Thane she left 2 years ago. Wayne lowered her head while Thane threw Henry in front of her. "Apologize." Henry was saying something, but Wayne was blankly staring at the floor while the tears were streaming down her face. "Hey, you okay?" Wayne heard his voice from up close. Her heart hammered in her chest. Today also his voice had the same impact on her. She lifted her head and looked up. Their eyes met. Thane's eyes widened with shock and disbelief while Wayne stared back at him with hollow eyes where pain and emptiness were visible. Thane felt a rush of anger, remembering how she had left him without a word. But then his gaze landed on her swollen cheek, bruised lips, and pale face, which was drenched with tears. He lifted his hand and gently touched her cheek, when slightly hissed, lowering her gaze. "Henry, you got yourself in trouble." His voice was as cool as ice. He stood and strode towards Henry without giving him a chance to understand. He held his hand, and the room was filled with the bone-breaking voice and Henry's loud cry. Wayne gasped, grasping the hem of her shirt. They ordered his guard to throw Henry in the basement. They dragged out Henry while Tim came towards Wayne and crouched down. He extended his hand in front of her. Wayne staggered and shook her head in denial. "I can stand." She tried to stand but stumbled. Tim held her by shoulders and made her stand. He noticed the pained expression on her face, and she bit her lower lip between her teeth to hold back the groan. He stared at her suspiciously. Wayne took off his hand she spoke, not meeting his gaze. No, you are not. You don't make eye contact when you are lying, he spontaneously said. I looked at him surprisingly. He shook his head and placed his hand on her shoulder, while let out a painful groan. Show me what's there. Wine moved back. Okay, fine, as you wish, he said, and wrapped his arm around her waist and pulled her closer. With a jerk, he tore off her sweatshirt from the left shoulder. She gasped, trying to cover it up, but he held her hands in a firm grip. She hid her face in his chest embarrassingly. His eyes darkened, seeing the bruises on her shoulder. He pulled the shirt down. There were scars and bruises of cigarette burns all over her back. Then clenched his jaw and turned her around to take a better view at her back. Who the hell did this? He muttered through gritted teeth, staring at the huge burn scar. Asher, my husband, she whispered in a tearful voice. Then clenched his fist while the veins in his forehead and neck popped out. He fished out his phone and called the doctor. I want you at my place in 10 minutes. He spoke as soon as the doctor answered the call and declined the call without hearing his answer. You should change before the doctor arrives. He covered up her back and turned her to face him. I'll send some clothes for you, he said, and walked out without glancing at her. Anne flopped on bed and closed her eyes. Time skip. The doctor came and checked Anne's bruises. He gave her the ointment for the scars and bruises. The man was wearing Thames button-up shirt, which the maid brought earlier. She sat in front of the dressing mirror and unbuttoned the first 3 buttons, sliding the shirt from her shoulders, staring at the scars and bruises, and closed her eyes tightly. She applied the ointment on the bruises and tried to apply it on the back, but her hand didn't reach it. The door knocked, grabbing her attention. She swiftly said, "Coming," thinking it would be the maid because Tham was nowhere and earlier the maid had come. The door opened, revealing Tham. Man looked up to the doorbell. Tham closed the door and began taking steps towards her. Man quickly adjusted her shirt. I thought it was the maid, she said in a low tone. Tham nodded, coming closer, making her nervous. Let me help you. His cold stare made her shiver. No, thank you, I can do it, she mumbled, stepping back. Tham ran his fingers through his hair, letting out a deep breath. Don't force me to be harsh with you. He snatched the ointment and got a swab from her and made her sit, and lowered her head while Tham gently applied it all over her bruises and scars. You don't have to bother, she said, staring at his reflection in the mirror. Tham kept the cotton swab aside, ignoring what she said, and scooped her in his arms, taking her off guard. What are you doing? I can walk. He ignored her resistance and placed her on the bed gently. He walked to the washroom, and after a few moments he came out drying his hands. When can I go back home? She asked impatiently. Tham sat beside her, staring at her coldly. You don't have any home. His words stabbed her heart. She felt tears brimming in her eyes, but she blinked it. He was right, she didn't have home. There was no one waiting for her. You will be staying here with me. No, I can't. He held her hand. Stop being stubborn, Wine. Once you left me and see what you did to yourself. Wine stayed silent. Why did you leave me, Wine? Whatever the reason was, we could have sorted it out. He spoke in a soft tone. Wine bit her quivering lower lip. It's all in past, get over it. Whatever happened to me was my destiny. Then grabbed her by waist and pulled her closer, caressing her swollen cheek. How to get over it when we are this time together? He whispered and subconsciously softly kissed her cheek. Wine closed her eyes, leaning into his affectionate touch, which she had been longing for 2 years. Wine came back to her senses and opened her eyes while Tham pulled away. This is wrong, she stuttered, scooting away from him. This is not wrong. What you did was wrong. Breaking my heart was wrong. Being unfaithful to me was wrong. Marrying that person was wrong. Are you going to taunt me about Asher every moment? Her voice broke. No, I'm just trying hard to control my temper. How did he give you that scar? What else has he done to you? I swear I'll make him pay for each and everything. He was clenching and unclenching his fist, trying hard to control his rage. Looking at her face, he would get angry all over. You don't have to be so good to me. I did wrong to you and it hit me back. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I'm sorry for hurting you so much. Answer my damn question, he muttered in a dark tone. She wiped her face, then looked away from her and began pacing back and forth. He felt like ripping Asher's head off his neck. He He splashed hot water on me and he snatched my grandma's house from me. 𝐻𝐻 walked towards the wall and began punching it constantly while cursing under his breath. 𝐻𝐻 stopped, she mumbled, going towards him. 𝐻𝐻, she held his hand. 𝐻𝐻 stopped, lowering his head while breathing heavily. You are hurt, she mumbled, looking at his bruised hand. Yes, I am hurt, but not by this. He gently took off her hand from his. You wouldn't have been through so much if you had talked to me. Instead, you ran away. I was searching for you the whole year like a madman. You have really hurt me a lot, he said in a low tone and barged out while Wine sat on the floor. I don't want you to hate your dad. I may bear your hatred, but I can't see you broken, she whispered. Next day, 𝐻𝐻 spent all night burning in rage while from his sources he got to know Asher had been hiding somewhere. He slept in morning or far, though it was 8 a.m. when he woke up and freshened up. He made his way to the dining room, rubbing his temples, as he had a severe headache. As 𝐻𝐻 sat, the maid began serving him breakfast. Did Wine have breakfast? He asked, scrolling through his phone. No, sir, she didn't eat anything. Instead, she was helping me in the kitchen. When I told her not to do it, she said she's a slave. She said she shouldn't be sitting in room and she should be treated like a maid. 𝐻𝐻 kept away his phone. Go and call her. The maid nodded and walked out. After a few minutes, the maid came back along with Wine, who was still in 𝐻𝐻's shirt. 𝐻𝐻 just said the maid too. What did you say earlier? I am a slave, so I should be treated like other workers. She spoke with her head high while gazed down. 𝐻𝐻 leaned on the chair. Asher told me you bought me. I know my place. Then being my slave, you should do whatever I say, he said, fixing his eyes on her. Sure, sir. 𝐻𝐻 wanted to puke, hearing sir from her mouth. First of all, you will call me by my name. Wine nodded reluctantly. Go sit and have breakfast with me. She opened her mouth to say something, but he interrupted her. You don't have any right to say no. She nodded in defeat and sat on the chair. And skipped. After having breakfast, 𝐻𝐻 ordered Wine to clean his room while he went to attend a call. Wine cleaned the dining room table and did the dishes. The maid escorted her to 𝐻𝐻's room, her eyes widened seeing the condition of the room. Clothes, books and towels were scattered in every corner of the room. The bedsheet was hanging down, while the pillow was nowhere to be seen. Wine entered, picking the books, clothes and towels while 𝐻𝐻 entered with a smell. After cleaning this, bring me a cup of coffee, he said, sitting on the sofa. Wine nodded and tried to focus on her work as she could feel his burning gaze making holes in her back. After 20 minutes, she was done. She looked around when her eyes landed on a portrait which was kept upside down. As Wine picked it, the memories of past began flashing before her eyes. It was her and 𝐻𝐻's picture which was taken when he had proposed her. She stared at it with teary eyes and then kept it properly. I'm done. She waited for his next order, then stood and picked out the ointment and cotton swab. Sit here, he gestured towards the bed. Wine sat while 𝐻𝐻 squeaked and began unbuttoning her shirt. Wine felt goosebumps when his cold fingers came in contact with her skin. She swiftly held his hands. I can do it. He passed her a dead stare and unbuttoned her shirt without caring about her resistance. Wine sat with a lower head due to embarrassment. 𝐻𝐻 applied the ointment and stood before her. He held her chin and lifted her head. You shouldn't be embarrassed of yourself, he said and made her stand. They stood in front of the dressing mirror. You are as beautiful as you were. He placed his chin on her head and wrapped his arms around her waist. Wine stared at their reflection. It was as if they were made for each other. Her gaze traveled to the reflection of their portrait. Her vision blurred as tears brimmed in her eyes. She looked down, holding back her tears. I can see the longing in your eyes. If things hadn't ended the way it did, maybe the circumstances would be different now, he whispered, tightening his grasp around her. Wine leaned back, resting her head on his chest. Why does it have to end this way? She mumbled. 𝐻𝐻 placed a soft kiss on her head and opened his mouth to speak, but the door burst open and a feminine figure barged in. She stopped staring at him with an unpleasant look on her face. Wine swiftly buttoned up the remaining 3 buttons and tried to move out of his embrace, but 𝐻𝐻 stood still. What the hell, Elora? This is how you barge into someone's room? He growled. Elora and Wine both flinched. 𝐻𝐻 held Wine's hand and rubbed his was same way 2 years ago. Mind your language, Alora. Whatever she is doing with me is none of your business. Get lost from here before I throw you out. He spoke furiously through gritted teeth. Alora stomped out. I must leave, she said in a low tone, then glared at her. Did I tell you to leave? She shook her head in denial. You leave with me? I'll buy you other important stuff. Wine just nodded in acknowledgement, as she knew arguing with him was a waste of time. They walked to the living room where Alora was sitting fuming in rage. She passed the middle stair while released her hand from Thane's tight yet gentle grip, only to earn a death stare from him. As soon as Wine's eyes landed on Mr. Kim, she hid behind Thane. His dark aura was enough to make her shiver. What is this girl doing here, Thane? He growled as soon as he saw Thane. Thane stared at him coldly. He yelled and insulted Alora because of this girl. Teach your Alora some manners, he said, shrugging his shoulders. And this girl has a name. Whatever she is doing here is none of your business. Where are your manners, Theo? Mr. Kim stood and strode towards Theo while Wine gripped his shirt from behind. Alora is your fiancée. You can't insult her just for some outsider. Wine's grip on Theo's shirt loosened. This didn't go unnoticed by Theo. Fiancée, when did we get engaged? That's all you're planning, Dad. I never agreed with it. Alora has no value in my life, he emphasized each word. Mr. Kim opened his mouth to speak, but Theon's phone rang, grabbing his attention. He attended the call while the person from the other side said something. Okay, I'm coming. He declined the call and held Wine's hand. I need to leave, he turned towards Wine. You will not come out of my room until I return, he said, and began dragging her into his room. But why, what happened? She asked confusingly while Theon entered the room and closed the door. You asked too many questions. Just do as I said. Don't open the door for anyone except me. Lock the door, understand? He said in a serious tone. Wine nodded in acknowledgement and pat her cheek and walked out. At night, it was 11 p.m. Wine was pacing back and forth in Theon's room. He hadn't returned yet. The door knocked, grabbing her attention. She stared at the door, thinking who it might be when the door knocked again. Wine opened the door. It's me, Theo. She swiftly opened the door and moved aside. Theo entered exhaustedly. Wine closed the door while Theo flopped on the bed. Wine poured the water into the glass and held it before him. Theo sat straight and took the glass. Wine noticed his bruised knuckles with dried blood on them. Where were you? She asked curiously. Theo kept away the glass and held her hand, gesturing to sit beside him. Do you want to punish Asher by yourself? He asked softly. Wine clenched her fist. Each scar, each torment inflicted by Asher felt new again. He had deeply crushed her soul to the core. You caught him? He nodded. She let out a sigh. I want to. Will you be able to see him? I mean, his condition is really bad. You tortured him, didn't you? Of course I did, he said, shrugging his shoulders. Wine shook her head. I want to see him. He pulled her closer with a jerk. Wine bumped into his chest while placing her hand on his shoulder. Are you sure? She nodded. You must kill him with your hands. What? Thane nodded, caressing her cheek. But how can I? Then you wouldn't be able to see his condition. He blew on her face, moving away, and picked out the cigarette from his pocket. You smoke? She asked, shocked. Thane walked towards the balcony. I do. So what? He said, taking a deep drag on the cigarette and releasing it into the air. Wine stared at his back and spoke. I want to see Asher. Let's go. Not now. I had told Maria to bring dinner for you. I'm sorry I didn't realize you couldn't have lunch. She stood behind him. Stop smoking, she said in a clear voice. Then stopped and looked at her with a questioning gaze. I don't like it. It reminds me of those days. Then threw the cigarette and crushed it under his feet. He moved closer to her and cupped her face. I'm sorry I didn't realize it. Overwhelmed by her emotions, Wine spontaneously threw her arms around his neck, letting out the tears that she was holding. Then wrapped his arms around her waist. She snuggled into his neck. The room was filled with her sobs. Thane's hand traveled to her hair. He stroked it softly while placing soft kisses on her shoulder. The knock on the door broke the trance of their moment. Wine pulled out, tucking her hand behind her ear while Thane groaned internally and made his way to open the door. The maid was standing with a tray full of food. Thane and filled with the smell of blood. Q.'s grip around his arm tightened. There was just one light crescent which was hanging over Ash's brutally injured, unconscious figure. Q gasped, seeing his condition. He was shirtless with burns all over his chest to abdomen. His right hand was cut off from the wrist. His face was drenched in blood while the blood was constantly dripping from his legs. Q glanced at Q, who was coldly staring at Asher while his muscles were tense. Q felt nauseous. Seeing Ash's condition, she released Q's arm and held his hand. "Let's go from here," she said in a low tone. Then looked at her, his gaze softened, seeing her pale face. He nodded, intertwining fingers with her, and made his way out. "Are you okay? Should I call the doctor?" he asked worriedly as soon as they came out of the basement. "No, I'm fine. I didn't imagine his condition like this." She looked at Q, who was staring at her worriedly, and held her both hands. "Don't kill him. Being alive in this condition is worse than death. Just forget about him. I won't kill him unless you want me to." Q nodded and pressed her forehead against his. "Thank you so much. I'm not worth it. I just deserve your hate," she mumbled, closing her eyes. "How can I hate you, Q? You are all about love head to toe. You deserve to be loved." Q smiled sadly and placed her hand on his cheek. "I have hurt you. Let's forget the past and start a new journey together," he whispered. "But you're dead. I don't want you to fight with him because of me," she said in a low tone, caressing his cheek with her thumb. "He can't do anything now. Not the dumb Q. I know he had taken advantage of your grandma's health condition and threatened you to leave me. I can't blame you for leaving me. You were forced. I can't imagine Dad could scoop so loud to stop the treatment of a sick person," he said through clenched jaw. "I thought you don't know." He released a long breath. "Let's go. What if your dad or Alora saw us?" she said, looking around. "You're way too scared of Dad, but don't worry, he's sleeping, and Alora has gone back." He held her hand and made his way into the house. "I have bought your important stuff, and there's a dress in there. Be ready before I come home tomorrow." "Why?" she asked confusingly. "Because we are going on a date." He kissed her nose with a smile. Q's lips curved into a smile as this was the first time he smiled since they met. Next morning, Q woke up rubbing her eyes. She lifted her head and found herself on Theon's chest. He was sleeping soundly, holding her in his firm embrace. She rested her chin on his chest, staring at him. She leaned and kissed his chin and touched his nose with her index finger, then scrunched his nose slightly, making her giggle. She stared at him for a while and then glanced at the wall clock. It was 5 in the morning. She tried to break his fence, but he switched the position and buried his face in her neck. "It's still early. Sleep." His muffled voice reached her ears, making her smile. "I'm used to wake early," she said, playing with his hair. "As long as I remember, you were a deep sleeper." But since I moved back here with Asher, she left her sentence incomplete. Then pressed soft kisses over her neck. "How many months have you been with him?" "I was married for 6 months, but for 3 months I was in village with grandma, and when she passed away, Asher brought me here to use me as an ATM." He just hummed in response, rubbing his nose on her neck. "Let's not mention that pastor again." He lifted his head and kissed her forehead and snuggled into her neck. Q closed her eyes with a smile. After so long, she had a peaceful sleep in his arms, which she longed each moment. Time skipped. Q woke up at 12 p.m. Q was nowhere. He had just left a note saying, "I'm going with Dad for an important meeting. Have breakfast and be ready by 6. She freshened up wearing his hoodie and sweatpants. After having breakfast, she was wandering around the house. At 4:30 p.m., she went to change and do her makeup. By 4:45, she was ready, but Q was nowhere. She was desperately waiting for him. The clock clicked past 6, but he hadn't returned yet. Q made her way towards the pool area and dipped her legs in the swimming pool and settled down. She smiled, thinking about Q, when the footsteps behind her grabbed her attention. She turned around with a smile but frowned, seeing Alora. "You're such a shameless girl. You seduced my fiancé after seeing how much Mr. King dislikes you. You still have the audacity to stay." She spoke furiously, stepping forward. Q stood before her. "Mind your language, Alora. King is not your fiancé." Alora chuckled. "A slave is talking back to me. Last time Mr. King threw you out of his life, but now I will throw you out of his life." Q 𝐾𝐿 is just mine, she said, and without giving her a second to understand, she pushed �W𝐚 into the swimming pool. The water splashed while 𝐿𝐿ora laughed, seeing her throwing her hands and gasping for air. "Goodbye, �W𝐚, no one can save you," she said with a pout and walked away, waving at her. �W𝐚 was drowning with muffled scream, but no one was there to hear her. Soon her voice and protest stopped. 𝐻𝐿, who just hurriedly reached home, asked Maria about �W𝐚, who said she saw her walking towards the pool area. 𝐻𝐿 was walking towards the pool area when his eyes landed on 𝐿𝐿ora. He looked at her suspiciously but shook his head. Nothing was more important than �W𝐚 right now. As 𝐻𝐿 reached the pool area, his breath hissed, seeing �W𝐚's motionless body floating. �W𝐚, he whispered with teary eyes, and without wasting a second, he jumped into the pool. He carried her out of the pool and laid her. �W𝐚, open your eyes, he spoke, patting her face with trembling hands as her lips had turned white while her face turned pale. He gave her CPR and called out Maria to call the doctor, while 𝐿𝐿ora also arrived with trembling feet. 2 hours later, �W𝐚 was still lying unconscious. The doctor did her checkup and said she was out of danger now. Mr. Kim and 𝐿𝐿ora were staring at 𝐻𝐿, who was walking back and forth for 2 hours. 𝐻𝐿, calm down. 𝐻𝐿 ran his fingers through his hair. How did she fall into the pool? He asked through gritted teeth. 𝐿𝐿ora gulped, wiping the sweat from her forehead. When I arrived, she was nowhere. 𝐻𝐿 glanced at her suspiciously. I will ask Maria. He walked out, followed by Mr. Kim. 𝐿𝐿ora let out a sigh, rubbing her temples. �W𝐚 opened her eyes, staring at the ceiling blankly. The earlier incident flashed before her eyes. She looked around, her eyes landed on 𝐿𝐿ora. �W𝐚 sat and removed the comforter she was in, 𝐻𝐿's sweatshirt and his pants. How could you scoop so long? She stood in front of 𝐿𝐿ora, making her flinch. You almost killed me. How could you be so stone-hearted? 𝐿𝐿ora opened her mouth to speak, but �W�N's slap cut her off. How did you even think to touch her, 𝐿𝐿ora? 𝐻𝐿 growled and stride towards 𝐿𝐿ora without giving them a second to understand. He choked her as Maria was out of the room and said she saw 𝐿𝐿ora going to the pool area. 𝐻𝐿, leave her. Are you out of your mind? Mr. Kim held his hand, but he shoved him away. Never in my life. I raised my voice at �W𝐚, and you all didn't miss a chance to kill her. He roared while 𝐿𝐿ora was struggling to move away his hands. 𝐻𝐿, she will die, leave her, she said, moving away his hands. He released her with a jerk while 𝐿𝐿ora lied down, coughing. �W�N quickly poured the water for her. This is too much, 𝐻𝐿. What would I have answered my friend if something had happened to her? �W�N flinched, hearing his growl. She gave the water to 𝐿𝐿ora, rubbing her back. Oh, please, Dad, my friend, his daughter, my business, my circle. I'm sick of it. I have been hearing this since forever. Where am I in all this? Your friends, your business, your reputation, and your ego have mattered to you your whole life. What was I? Where was I? You snatched away my love, my happiness, and turned me into a beast. Isn't this enough for you? Leave me to live my life. If you care for your friend's daughter so much, then go marry her yourself. His words froze Mr. Kim. �W�N held his arm to restrain him from saying further, but he didn't stop. What are you saying? I did this for you, he said in a low tone. For me? What was for me? Everything was for you here. You knew where my happiness was, yet you. �W�N interrupted him. 𝐻𝐿 stopped. She tightened her grip around his hand. 𝐻𝐿 let out a deep breath, looking away. Mr. Kim turned around and walked out with lowered head. 𝐿𝐿ora tried to stand but stumbled on her feet. �W�N released 𝐻𝐿's arm and moved to help her, but he held her hand. She asked him a questioning gaze. No need to help her. She opened her mouth to speak, but he placed his index finger on her lips. No means no. 𝐿𝐿ora somehow walked out while 𝐻𝐿 locked the door and laid on the bed. �W�N saw him resting his head on the headboard and inhaled deeply. �W�N walked towards him. You shouldn't have been so rude with your dad. 𝐻𝐿 opened his eyes. Can you imagine how I felt seeing you floating? I felt my soul leaving my body. I don't want to lose you again, he said in a low tone and tugged on her waist, gently pulling her on his lap. But I'm fine now. He snuggled into her neck and sighed for the 100th time. After a long silence, �W�N spoke. You weren't like this before. Now you can't even control your anger, she said, and tangled her fingers in his hair. This is what Dad made me. She pressed a long kiss on his hair. That which ruined our date. He lifted his head, �W�N smiled. It's okay, we can go some other day. She pecked his nose, then stared at her with affection, tucking the hair strand behind him surprisingly, and then her lips curved into a wide smile. Yes, Ken smiled, burying his face into her hair. Thank you, he mumbled in a muffled voice. I love your hair so much, he said, kissing her hair and looked at her and then at her lips. He leaned and captured her lips softly. They were lost in the moment. The world seemed to fade. He deepened the kiss, feeling a spark ignite. After a few moments, Ken pulled out, feeling she is out of breath. I missed you so much, she whispered over his mouth. Ken placed a butterfly kiss on her neck and began sucking her sweet spot. Wine moaned, pulling his hair slightly. He pulled out, staring at her red cheeks. Wine understood his intentions and pulled away, but he held her firmly. I'm sleepy. Don't worry, you can sleep the whole day, he said, showering her with kisses and laid her on the bed, hovering over her. 3 years later, Ken and Wine are happily married and are blessed with a son who is now 2 years old. All these years, Ken has showered her with so much love that she almost forgot her painful past. Now Wine entered the bedroom where little Tirone was giggling, holding his toy gun, while Ken was holding his real gun. Her eyes widened, seeing them. How many times have I said you not to teach my son these stupid things to him? Ken closed his eyes, biting his lip. Give it to me, Tirone, she said, standing before them. Ken threw away his gun, while Tirone pointed his gun at Wine and acted of shooting her. Wine guessed, seeing his actions, while he giggled, throwing his arms around Ken, who was smiling as well. You are teaching him this? She asked with shocked expression. Ken gulped and shook his head in denial. No, he just loves the gun, so I was showing him how to hold it. I swear I'll hit you both with my shoes if I saw you with guns next time. Ken nodded in acknowledgement with an innocent face, while Tirone looked at her and spoke. I shoot you. Wine opened her mouth